Okay, I know we still have people joining us, but it is right about the hour. We want to make sure we leave plenty of time to hear from Dr. Crumbley. And so I'd like to welcome everybody to the Family Dynamics and Kinship Families Implications for Services and Programs webinar, which is being presented for the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network, a National Technical Assistance Center at Generations United. And this is our second in our webinar series, which we will be conducting over the next four-year period. And I would like to welcome all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you can give us your name, state, and if you're part of a tribe, your affiliation, and what role you play in serving grand families and kinship families. We are going to just spend a couple minutes giving you some information about the network, and then we're going to welcome Dr. Crumbley to present. We're going to invite all of you to just post your questions in the chat along the way, and we will get to those as soon as we can, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible. And we'd also like you just to engage with us through sharing your own experiences in the chat, things that you relate to what Dr. Crumbley's speaking about, or anything of that nature. And then I know we'd all love to just see your faces. So we do invite you to turn your cameras on at some point. I know Dr. Crumbley will really appreciate that, especially since he probably knows half of you joining us today. And I know it always delights him to see faces of friends and colleagues. So we would encourage you to do that. And if you cannot, that's okay too. So before we introduce Dr. Crumbley, I just want to share a little bit with you about the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network. I know some of you are already aware of our organization, but I know we do have a lot of first-time visitors with us, and we just want to spend a minute or two just telling you about our work and how you can become engaged with us. So Generations United, which has worked on behalf of kinship families and grand families since 1997, received a 5-year cooperative agreement with the Administration for Community Living. It's a $10 million cooperative agreement over a 5-year period. And we started that last year, and we're actually about to celebrate our 1-year anniversary, which we're very excited about. And the purpose of the Technical Assistance Center is to work with an array of government agencies and community-based organizations that are serving kinship families in various capacities, including kinship navigator programs. And if you take a look at our little graphic here, you will see the different systems and groups of professionals that we are working with in this capacity. And while we are not working, the network is not designed to work directly with the families, but we instead are going to impact our families by working with the professionals who are serving them on a day-to-day basis. I do want to mention that we are engaging families, kinship families and grand families in our work as subject matter experts, so making sure that their voices are elevated and integrated in everything that we do here at the network. Also, I just want to add, if you do have your phones handy, there's a little scan bar here. If you'd like to scan and sign up to access our network, we send out a monthly newsletter. We have just a wonderful array of resources that we share with you from the field and from the network, and also giving you information about upcoming webinars and other opportunities for networking, such as the one that we have today. So if you have not yet signed up, we encourage you to do that. Okay, and there's a number of different ways that we're providing technical assistance and that we are serving all of you. And there's some major categories as shown here. First is learning collaboratives and information dissemination. I know one of the greatest values of a network such as this is you being able to network with others who are doing this work and coming up with the same challenges and opportunities. So we are hosting a series of webinars such as this, and then we're also going to be doing learning collaboratives where you can meet with other professionals, either within your own system or across other systems that we spoke about to really learn from one another and to develop some solutions and strategies for working better with families. We are offering targeted specialized technical assistance support through both individualized technical assistance and also working with various jurisdictions and through a holistic TA that we're going to be offering to 2 states and 1 tribe. And that'll be more targeted, very specialized support to those jurisdictions. And we're going to be finding opportunities to replicate what we learn from that holistic TA so that all states and all jurisdictions can benefit from the support that we develop through that holistic technical assistance. And then we are also offering a centralized hub through our brand new, it just came out this week, website. And you'll see the website link there. It's gksnetwork.org. We encourage you to visit. We have some great resources already on the site. And of course, we would like for you to check back on that site frequently, because we will be adding new resources on an ongoing basis. You will also note that we are going to be elevating exemplary programs, practices, and policies through a process where you can apply to be have your program deemed exemplary by the network. And we will put information on the in the chat about that application. It's also on our website, and we are going to be accepting applications through November 16th. And there's contact information there as well if you have any questions along the way. And here's a picture of our homepage. And just to get you all interested in visiting our site, we do have a resource library, as you see at the top, where you can search by topics. And we'll be continuing to build on that, as I mentioned. Our events will be also listed there with the webinars and other events that we have as part of the network. And then you'll find an array of information about the network, about what we deem as technical assistance. There's great information on here about data about grand families and kinship families and more. And then there's a request assistance button at the top that you can use if you do need technical assistance. And that is my presentation. So thank you so much for, hold on, let me stop my sharing. Thank you so much for being here. And I really am so excited right now to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Joseph Crumbley. I know many of you already know him, but it's always worth just reminding you what a wonderful, wonderful man that he is, and just the expertise that he brings to all of us here today and every day. So Dr. Joseph Crumbley is a nationally renowned kinship expert. He has over 38 years of experience in private practice and also in consulting and training. He is a family therapist, and his clinical experience includes kinship, adoption, transracial adoption, foster care, chemical dependency, couples therapy, and also physical and sexual abuse counseling. He has provided an array of training and consultation to numerous organizations across the United States, national organizations, local organizations, public and private sector. And he's also consulted internationally. And I don't know if you know all the wonderful countries that he's been providing assistance to, but they're definitely worth naming. So he has provided consultation in China, in Britain, New Zealand, Canada, and also South Africa. So he's not just nationally renowned, he's internationally renowned. And he's also provided expert testimony on kinship care to the US Senate and the House, and also to the United Nations. And he's co-authored several books. One of those is with Robert Little, and that's entitled Relatives Raising Children, an Overview of Kinship Care. And then his second book is entitled Transracial Adoptions and Foster Care. And Dr. Crumbley is retired now, although he seems to be working more than ever, I can tell. And but he is conducting keynotes and speaking engagements and still doing some training. And fortunately for the network, He is one of our subject matter experts. And so we're thrilled that he is helping our network and assisting with some of our technical assistance and training as such. And so let me turn it over then to Dr. Crumbley. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Melissa, thank you so much for that warm introduction. And after that introduction, I kind of feel pressure because it's like you have to kind of live up to that, and do that. Also makes me feel old too. It's like, oh my goodness, look at all that stuff. But the best part has already happened, which is seeing the names and seeing, people that I've known over the years. So I'm already, just feeling so overwhelmed, and it's just really exciting. So but let me get started though. Okay. Would like to thank Generations United, would like to thank Melissa and Anna, Jaya, Donna, um, Ali for helping me make this presentation and allowing me to do this presentation. This module, and I know that sounds strange, module. The reason why I'm saying it's a module is because this is one of 5 modules that I've had an opportunity to put together. And it's part of a training that I just completed entitled The Strengths of Kinship Care. Um, it's very dear to me only because a few years ago I did training, a training of 5 modules, and it was titled Managing Risk Factors in Kinship Care. And to me, I feel like I'm coming full circle. Generations United, folks that I've known through the years, kind of got on me a little bit after I did that, and said, well, Joe, okay, we appreciate the risk factors and that's good. You need to do that. But how about the strengths? So that's really been on me for a few years, and it really inspired me. And that's why I've done this training recently that looks at the strengths of kinship care. And I think we have to look at challenges and strengths, but doing the strengths provides an opportunity to take a strengths-based approach to kinship care. So that's why I'm really glad that I had an opportunity to do that training, and particularly this model, this particular module, which looks at family dynamics. In looking at family dynamics, the reason why I wanted to look at family dynamics is because when I first got involved with kinship care, oh boy, I'm taking you back about 30, maybe, when was the AIDS epidemic? That's 40 years ago, 1980s. Kinship care was starting to become more popular. We were using more relative caregivers, and both non-relative and relative caregivers. And what we were told to do back then was to treat relative caregivers the same as if they were foster families or adoptive families. That was the best practice. That was the model that we were using. And that was our approach for assessments, home studies, interventions, services, evaluations of families, was very much based on the model of working with foster parents and adoptive parents. And I guess over the decades, we've come to realize, well, that's not working. Okay, there's something more to relative caregiver. There's something different about relative caregivers from non-relative foster and adoptive parents. And that's kind of what has inspired me through the years. And the purpose of this training is really threefold. One, to look at, that I'm doing today on family dynamics. And one is to look at, how does kinship care impact family dynamics? And the second goal is to look at, what implications does that impact have for your services and for your programs? And the third is to look at, how are family dynamics different from non-relative kinship families? And by that, I'm looking at foster care and adoption and looking at what's the difference there. Okay. So what I like to do in terms of looking at the impact of kinship care and family dynamics is to share with you a video of me doing some training with relative caregivers. Now, I had 2 options. I could have used a video that looked at training around family dynamics with professionals or service providers, or this other one that I'm going to be showing you, which is doing training on family dynamics with caregivers. And I chose this one because it doesn't stay theoretical when you're talking with relative caregivers. They bring you down to earth. They keep you honest. They make you real practical. So what's so to me, terrific about this particular video is that you actually get a chance to hear caregivers involved in sharing lived experiences around how family dynamics changed in their homes and how that they adapted to the changing in their family dynamics. And to me, that's what's so powerful. They will share with you what they saw. They helped me do what I was told I was doing was called kinship mapping. I didn't know that's what I was doing. So I've been using that term, but they mapped kinship in their family. You got to see how the roles changed, how the relationships changed, and how they adapted to those changes, okay? So we're gonna start off with that video. I should say that I've used a genogram in that video as well. But the genogram is very specific to this audience. If you feel comfortable and want to do kinship mapping, you will need to develop genograms that are specific to your racial, cultural, and demographic community so that it's much more relevant to your community, and so that you'll see how relevant it can be. But in me using this genogram, it gave me an opportunity to do two things. One, to identify how kinship care impacts family dynamics, and two, how the families adapt to those changes so that they could keep their children in the home. Because to me, that's the strength of family dynamics. It allows relative caregivers to assume those new roles and those new relationships, to set up that new interactions so that they can keep the children in the home and out of the system, out of foster care and adoption. That doesn't mean that foster care and adoption does not have its place. I worked with adoptive and foster families, so I have a very special appreciation for them. But the strength of kinship care is that it keeps families out of the system. And that's, to me, what's so special about family dynamics. It's looking at how families are able to assume those roles, assume those relationships, change those relationships and interactions so the children can remain in the home. And what's fascinating is they can do it in a matter of hours, 10, 15, 24 hours, 72 hours. They can make those changes so that the children stay out of the system. So as you're watching this video, for the professionals that are watching the video, service providers, here's the question. How do these dynamics impact your service, your policies, your practice? For caregivers who might be in the audience, what I'd like you to do is to look at how it's changed your families and if there's any similarities or differences in those on the impact in your families. So for the professionals and the providers, implications of dynamics for your services. For caregivers, if you would, look at if these changes are typical or if they're different than what you've experienced. So on that note, Anna, if you would, please, she'll be starting this. And any questions, chat, please. This morning, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is family dynamics. And the topic and the questions that I'd like to ask are two. The first question is, how does kinship care change and impact my family? Has anybody experienced that it's kind of impacted your roles, your relationships, your responsibilities? So yeah, that first question is, how does kinship care impact and change relationships and roles? And the most important part is talking about how you can manage that and how you can help your family make those adjustments to those changes, okay? I'm going to be asking you a few questions while I'm presenting, and I just want you to feel free to respond. If it feels comfortable to you, please do so. If it's too personal, I respect your privacy, but I do want you to kind of share as well same things that have happened to you, and I'll be asking those questions of you at the same time. So let me start off with this. We've had a chance to talk with a lot of caregivers about kinship care. And we had a chance to do a lot of research. And what I've put together here is kind of what we call a genogram. It's kind of like a family map of what your families may be looking like. What the research is telling us is that usually, well, I'll ask you, from your contacts with each other, who's usually providing kinship care?
What member of the family is it?
The grandparent.
The grandparents. Do I have aunts and uncles here that are doing it as well? Oh, well, this is a good proof right here. Okay. That's what we're finding. It's mostly grandparents. The other thing is that we're finding out that of which grandparent do you think is the one that's frequently involved in caring for the children?
Grandmother.
Yeah, grandmothers. Yeah, that's what we're finding out. It's grandmothers. Are these grandmothers single-headed households, or do you think they're multiple-headed households? What do you think, and what's your experience told you? Both? Okay. What our research is saying is that for the majority of them, they're single-headed households. So they're doing everything, you know. They're doing everything from managing the house to running the children to dealing with the bills, and they're doing it as a single person. So what we're seeing are grandparents, grandmothers, single-headed households, and that's pretty much what we've gotten from you and from our interviews in terms of what that family looks like. And this is what this map shows. Grandparent, and we can put S there if you want, grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the birth parents, what do they to each other based on this genogram? Siblings, exactly. And then from the aunt and the birth parent and from the uncle, they have children. And what's the relationship of those children to each other? Cousins, exactly. Now I have IC. That's the identified child that's going into care. So what I have here is a genogram that's showing the child going into care. And my question to you is, when you move a child, when a grandparent agrees to raise their grandchild as if they were the parent of that child, where does that child's position shift in this genogram? Up, down, over? Which? All over the place. Okay, all right. So let's see where it starts to move. But I'll be more specific though. If that grandparent is raising that child as their birth child, where do you see that position, that child's position move? Because they're raising them now as if they were one of their children. So where do you think it goes?
To the first parent.
Okay, all right, let's see what happened. Why is it appropriate for the child to be on that position? Better yet, what does that child have in common with the aunt, the birth parent, and the uncle now?
They're all equal.
What makes them equal?
Siblings.
And the siblings?
They're being raised by that.
They're being raised by the grandma. That's exactly what they now have in common. Now, granted, aunts and uncles and the birth parents, they're certainly different and the relationships are different, but what they do have in common is that they're now being raised by the grandparent. And this grandparent is now raising that child as if it was their birth child. So, what I'd like you to do now is to kind of go back and think about what your son or your daughter said to you or reacted to you about raising that child. What'd they say to you?
A lot of animosity.
A lot of animosity.
Yeah, they weren't happy.
They weren't happy.
Are you talking about the birth parent? What the?
Well, we'll leave the birth parent out right now, because I'm going to get to that too. Okay, but what did your children say about raising? Yeah, the aunt and uncle.
Okay.
Yeah, what did they say about raising that child? They were supportive. Okay.
It was mixed.
It was mixed.
It was mixed.
What was it? What was it mixed? How was it mixed?
So in our case, the birth parent has a twin sister.
Mm-hmm.
So the twin sister was in support of her sister.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some animosity there.
Okay, some
The other
animosity.
siblings were
Okay.
supportive of us.
Okay, so the support was split.
Yes.
Some was for the birth parent, and sometimes the support is for you, their parent. All right. Anybody else? What else did you experience? Yes.
I still had two at home when I brought in two.
Okay.
So it took away those years with my boys in middle and high school.
Okay.
And they had to accept it, and they didn't like it at all.
Okay. All right. So in your situation, you were still, that aunt and uncle you were still raising them
Correct.
in the family.
Yes.
And they had
Still
some,
am.
and still are, and they had some animosity. Was it jealousy or?
Jealousy, and their sisters were already grown out of the house.
Okay.
So it was their turn
Oh,
with me.
I love that.
And
Yeah, that's
it
great the way
took-
you said that. Yeah.
I got a 1.5 and 5-year-old at
Okay.
an emergency hearing.
Mhm.
And they whether they liked it or not, and they didn't like it.
Yeah.
And they're still adjusting.
So there's animosity. There was a little bit of
Animosity, I would call it, jealousy.
a jealousy,
And also, you know, I work full-time and commute, and I'm the single.
and you're the single grandparent. Okay. So there's jealousy, and I like the way you said it. They felt like you were taking time away from them. And the other thing that I thought was critical about what you said is that they felt it was their turn
It was their turn.
because other siblings had moved out.
Because I had, yes.
Exactly. Okay. Now, if you notice, there was a continuum of responses that went from support, glad you're doing it, to jealous, okay, to feeling as though you're taking time away from them. I've heard some aunts and uncles even go so far as to say, you're taking time away from who?
The grandkids,
The grandkids.
the ones you already have.
The ones you already have.
That is hard for the grandparent.
Yes.
Who's raising the child.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for the aunt
Mm-hmm.
and the uncle.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard and it's hard on the grandkids.
Oh my goodness, you covered it all. She covered everybody in here. It's hard on the aunt, the uncle, the birth parent, and the grandchildren. So everyone is feeling it
Right.
because of that one decision, that one move of you caring for that child. Okay? All right, now let's go to the birth parent. What did the birth parent say to you? How do they feel about you now raising their child as if you were the parent? What'd you get? How did they respond? What'd they say?
Anger.
Anger.
That's where the animosity really,
That's where the animosity came out. Hmm. Do you remember what the things that were said in anger?
I'm the mother, not you.
I'm the mother, not you.
you're taking her from me.
You're taking her from me. I'm still
I'm still her mother.
her mother. Okay. So you can get that type of response, which is that anger, kind of resentment, kind of competition. Now, you can have the other extreme too, which is thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. I'll come back. But there's a continuum of responses that the relative caregiver and that the grandparent is subject to. I want you to look at the birth parent child dyad. Do any of you know what the birth parent may have said to the child about listening to you and relating to you as their parent?
I'm always going to be your mother.
I'm always going to be your mother.
Yeah.
What else did you hear them say?
If you ever need me, call me.
If you ever need me, call me.
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else remember or heard or have some idea what was said to the birth parent? Okay.
I was assaulted.
You were assaulted by your daughter? Okay. All right. So that anger was actually physical. Okay. So you can go from the extreme of thank you or to the other extreme of being assaulted or the other extreme of I'm still your parent. I'll be there. I'll be back. Okay. So again, the whole idea is that one move impacts so many different people. I think it's important that we realize that for that relative caregiver, when you move that child, it changes interactions, and it's like a system. It's like a domino effect. Everybody is affected by what happens in that change. Now, one of the things that we realize is that children don't always go into the care of grandparents. They sometimes go into the care of an aunt or an uncle. Now, this child has moved here into the care of the aunt. The child that I have identified as IC and the child that they're living with are cousins. Now, let's assume they've gone through the honeymoon period. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming. We're going to have fun. And now they're going to be starting to relate as what?
Siblings.
Siblings. Okay. What might this child be saying to the IC about?
I was here first.
I don't have to finish the sentence. Right. I was here first. What else? When are you going back home? That's my mom. Can you hear the dialogue? Okay. Now let's go one step further. What do you think that child is saying to their aunt or uncle about which is their parent, about that child living there. What does that conversation sound like?
Could you say that again?
Yeah. What do you think this child is now saying to mom about cuz living in their home?
I don't like them being here.
I don't like them being here. You're letting them get away with things that you didn't let me. Why are they here? When are they leaving? So for that, again, that relative caregiver who is the aunt or uncle, and I guess I'm thinking of the young lady here who has 2 children that are already still raising, and they're living together as siblings now. There's going to be some feelings. They're going
They're
to be.
not allowed to call me mom,
Oh,
which is okay.
wow! But they did not want
But
her.
if my boys
Did not want
let the
them
girls
call you
call me
mom.
mom or refer to me as mother.
Oh, okay. Let me just kind of repeat that. In that situation where they were living together as siblings, one set of siblings was saying to the child that came in not to even call you mom. Okay, so you can hear that dialogue, and then I guess they didn't want you to respond to them as mom either, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, all right. So my whole point is that when you move a child into kinship care, and I think you know this already, and I think any relative caregivers that are considering it or thinking about it, it's important to know that you are changing pre-existing relationships. In fact, that's what makes kinship care different from non-relative foster care and adoption. See, in non-relative foster care and adoption, the foster parent, the birth parent, and the child in care, they don't know each other. They don't have a past. You know, for you, you now have to go from being a grandparent to a parent. Those cousins now have to go from being cousins to each other to now siblings with each other. That aunt now has to go from being an aunt to the child to the parent of a child. So what you actually have here is a changing in pre-existing relationships. There's changes in pre-existing roles, changes in responsibilities, accountability. All of a sudden, the children have to figure out who tells who what to do. There's even a change in terms of power, in terms of who is responsible for day-to-day situations. The status even changes. And that's where a lot of the birth parents have that resentment, because you now have more power than they did. Now they do over the children. You have more status.
With me, I'm not even a birth parent, these are step. So there was a little bit, I wouldn't say any disagreements, but I wasn't their father.
Yep, you're not dad. And I can even see that being thrown in your face. Okay. And now you've got more power because you weren't even blood. You know, you were a step parent. So that kind of changing again in terms of power, status, and now you have more authority, and your loyalty also changes in kinship care. Let me show you another diagram. We know this one. Child goes into care, you're raising them as your child, as a sibling, but look at what else happens. Oh, I see some folks nodding. What just happened?
They became the first child.
Yeah. All of a sudden, their needs take precedent to the birth parent. So even your loyalty shifts, and there could be feelings about that. What did the birth parents, from your experience, how did the birth parent feel about your shifting in loyalty? And how did they feel about you placing the needs of the children over them? You said tough?
It's tough.
Okay. How did you know it was tough for them? What did they say or do?
Their behavior, you could see sadness and the crying and, you know, but I'm your child, this is your grandchild.
Okay, that's the Achilles heel, you see, because all of a sudden, and all of a sudden they say to you, how can you do this? I'm your child. You knew me first. Because that's who your initial attachment with was first. And we're going to talk a little bit more about later in another training. But it's that shifting of loyalties where now you have to place the needs of the children over that of the birth parents. So what do? How do you handle all that? First thing you're going to have to do is anticipate in your family and get them to realize that these roles have changed. That has to be talked about. Who tells who what to do? Who's responsible now? Who does discipline with the children, so that they'll support you? Because if you don't, you're going to have to be aware of the fact that there may be some resistance. There may be even some sabotage. There even may be some collusion among themselves as to, you don't have to listen to them. They're not your parents. And there's going to be loss. Loss in terms of that relationship, of that status with the child, of their relationship, of time spent with you as grandparents. I was working with one family where the child moved in with grandma, and I thought everything should be fine. They were coming over every weekend, and then we changed it and we set up a legal relationship, and the child began to run away. And I asked him, why are you running away? His response was, every time my cousins come over, grandmom never says what to them? No. She's acting like grandma. She's not there to be a discipline. I mean, that's what I enjoy, being a grandparent. You know, I don't have to be the discipline. You know, I can blame everything on mom and dad. You know, I can say, look, I'll let you stay up all night if I could, but it's your mother and your father. I'd let you eat all you want, all the sugar. You see what I mean? And that's the enjoyment. But now, and that child was seeing her still act like grandparent. She never said no, okay? And she caught it the other way, because guess what? The grandchildren were saying, it's not fair for him to live with grandma, because living with grandma is like Christmas every day of the year. So she was catching it both ways, okay? So the child ran away and came back, and I told, well, I shouldn't tell you my mistakes, but I'll share it with you. I told the grandmom, go back and act like a grandmom again. Did I set her up or what? Oh, somebody said, yeah. I did set her up, didn't I? Yeah, because she went back to being grandmom and spoiling and not saying no. And then it was time for the child to go to bed. And she said, okay, time to go to bed. And the child said what? No. Sounds like you've done this before, okay? Because you try to go back to be a grandparent again, right? And then she finally realized, hey, you've got to be the parent, you've got to be the disciplinarian. So it was hard for her, because what did she lose? The joy of being a grandparent. And what did the child lose? The joy of having a grandparent. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about in terms of losses. And the losses, again, happen to everyone. It goes throughout. So for you as a caregiver, it's being able to see where the resistance might come from, where the collusion might come from, where you're going to have to get buy-in order to make this work, and getting the family to give you permission to change those roles, and getting the family to support your changing roles, you know, because you're going to have to get some buy-in. You're going to need that birth parent to say, when grandmom speaks, she speaks for who? Me. And you need to listen to grandmom the same way you would listen to me, you know. And you're going to have to get those other siblings to realize grandmom has to say no. You know, grandmom has to take time. Grandmom has to let him live with me, because if it's not me, then where would this child go? And I would have to do the same for who else? You. So it's those kinds of discussions, that type of work that relative caregivers and grandparents have to do. So my hope is that you'll be able to look at this map, put some names in those boxes, see how people are feeling about the change. I'm turning into a therapist, aren't I? Okay, but you already do it, okay? It's good, okay, good. Yeah, but to be able to kind of like map your family out and see how people are feeling, knowing how they're reacting, and then kind of help them adjust to those roles, yeah, that's what's gonna have to make it work. And that'll help you survive, and it'll also at the same time, you know, help you from not getting caught in the middle. So in summary, changing that child is not just moving a child. You're changing family relationships and dynamics. Everybody's affected. What you want to do is kind of like get an idea of how people are feeling, and then look at where the issues of loss may be, where the issues of resistance may come from, who you have to get buy-in from, and how to talk to people about the changing the relationships that are occurring in your family. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay. Anna, what did you see, Anna? I saw so many responses, Anna. What did you see?
Yeah, I will tell you that I was watching the video and not following the chat, but I hear that there were some really great comments in here and some great sharing. I don't believe there are any pending questions right now. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, that was the feeling too. I was kind of like watching the chat since I'd seen the video, and I was just getting comments around from the caregivers. There seemed to be comments that kind of validated a lot of what the other relative caregivers were saying and what the other relative caregivers were feeling. And from the professionals in the chat, again, it was kind of like validating the challenges. I think I see one here. Anna, do you see a question here?
question, let's see. Do you do in-person trainings and how would I find them?
Okay.
You are amazing. We all knew that.
Oh,
That's painful to hear some of this,
yeah.
which is also true. We're sharing that the videos are available, more videos. As a caregiver, she wished she'd had this training beforehand. Yeah, she said, I say that all the time, I'd love to spoil him and send him home, but that's not in the cards.
Oh, wow.
Reflections on birth moms. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My sister hates that her children call me mom and their kids call me grandma. She wants this to change.
Okay.
Yeah, real.
Yeah, I can. You can feel the feelings from the audience here. Yeah, in terms of how validating that is. And what I found so impressive, to me, the most important part, if nothing else, for caregivers and for providers. For the providers, I know you don't need another piece of paper. I know you have plenty of paperwork already. But if you can just do a mental map and do a mental kinship mapping to see where that child has moved, and then do the dyad work that you saw going on. How is this particular person affected by the child moving here? How is the extended family? How is the aunt and the uncle? So, because for me, it was the dyad work in terms of looking at how people were being affected and how they felt. That is so crucial in terms of anticipating the responses. So if you, as a service provider, if you could just kind of put that map together and look at where that child moved, and then just go through that dyad assessment of looking at all the combinations, just to give you an idea of where people are, how they're feeling, how the roles have changed, and where your work is going to be in terms of helping people adjust to the changes. So I'm hoping that, if nothing else comes out of this, for the caregivers that are watching this, my hope is, as I said at the end, put some names in the boxes, okay? Of people that you're living with, and see how they're feeling. And then have that conversation about the changes and how it's occurred, and talking to them about the loss and the grief. And the buy-in is crucial. Family members need to know that you can't do this all by yourself. You've got to get them to support you, to give you the permission. This will only work. And then the buy-in a lot of times is that this could be you. This could be your children. And we would then have to do the same for you. Okay.
So Dr. Crumbley, in terms of the family members, they can mend their relationships or try to mend the relationship by talking about it. Is that right? Talking amongst each other and really trying to get clarity?
Yeah, that's the strength of kinship care, okay, of being able to help each other adjust, help each other heal, help each other adapt, so that the child can still remain in the home. But definitely talking, see, this has implications for training, you see, because for me, kinship caregivers need to have, did you hear that one comment? I wish someone had done this with me before the children came into the home, or after the children come into the home. Because for so much, for relative caregivers, it's on the job training. It's after somebody gets upset and is hurt and is angry that you can make the change. So you're right, Anna, you are so on target in terms of, if you can anticipate it, let people know how it's going to change. I'll be more specific. Who's going to have to be doing the supervision? How does this change the bedrooms and space? How is this changing childcare? Who's going to have to be responsible for attending parent-teachers meetings? Who will I need help? Do you hear that list? Do you hear that conversation? That's the conversation. And then people being able to talk about how they feel about it, rather than acting it out, but getting people to talk about it and to understand their importance in making this work. Anna, you sound like a therapist.
And as service providers, we can help that by facilitating those conversations too, right?
Yes, yeah. By training, as service providers, you can do it through training, preparing families for kinship care. This kind of training, if you notice, it's different from typical foster parent, adoptive parent training. You're talking about changing pre-existing relationships, preparing relative caregivers for this, and then giving relative caregivers strategy to, as you said, Anna, anticipate it, deal with the loss, and get the buy-in. Put some names in the boxes. That's what you should be doing in the training, so we can look at how people are feeling. And then the other part is, I've actually known people who are taking these videos on home visits, saying, where are you going with this? How has your family been affected by this? How do you make this work? Okay. Now, in the second part that I'm getting ready to go into, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how systems can help relative caregivers, particularly the grandparent, the aunt, the kin that's providing, how we can help them and how we can support them. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments or?
Well, we have a couple concrete questions,
Oh,
including
excellent.
a woman who is starting family group conferencing with their local DSS in the near future. And she's asking, at what point in the process would you bring up these concerns? As part of the conference, or after it's been decided by the family who the primary caregiver will be?
Okay, I think once the family has decided who the primary is going to be, that's where I think it's definitely important to talk about. Now, how does this change roles, responsibilities, relationships, and interactions? In fact, those need to become agenda items. I know you can't do it all in one meeting. In fact, just setting up the agenda to talk about these things is major, because a lot of people, you have to remember, in kinship care, people think that nothing's going to change. Pre-existing relationships are not going to change. I'm going to have the same rights, entitlements, and just putting this up there as an agenda item is an eye-opener. Okay. And just looking at how does this change roles, relationships, responsibilities, that becomes an agenda item at the very beginning. I find with CPS workers who are making that call, bringing those children in, they're dealing with it right on the spot. They can't wait for the family groups conferencing, because all of a sudden they have to talk about who has to share space, who has to, what's the room situation going to be like? You've got to work tomorrow. Who's going to be there to help tomorrow, the next day? Who's got to get clearances to now take care of the children? So for some, depending on you on how much of an emergency it is, it can also affect how immediately you have to bring that up. Okay. I hope that helps a little bit in terms of when you do it.
I think we're getting so many great comments in the chat and how much you're appreciated and valued amongst service providers out there. But I think let's shift to your presentation.
Okay.
And then we'll make space for more questions as we go. Yeah.
All right. The part I'd like to now go to is I don't know how that got up there, but it's gone. So that's good. Let's see. Ali, I go to share. And I go to this PowerPoint. Did I do
Yep,
that
the
right?
green share screen button, and then select what you'd like to share, and then the blue share button, and let me know if you're having any problems with that. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Looks
Doing okay?
good.
All right. And let's see. Let me come down here. I need to enlarge this. All right, here we go. Double click. Yep. Okay, excellent. Oh, I'm so happy I did that. Oh, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. I come from the transparency, overhead projector days, folks. Okay, I know there are a few people that can appreciate that. So I just get so excited when I can just get everything on and moving and not lose it. So I know that's being silly, but yeah. So let me move along. All right, now I'd like to look at family dynamics, implications, but I'd also like to do that comparison with foster care and adoption, because remember when we started this out, that was our model. that was the best practice. And so I want to look at the dynamics. I want to look at implications. And the way I'm going to do that is by looking at differences between kin and non-kinship families. And again, chat your questions, and Anna will be helping me go through those, okay? All right, number one, kin. Pre-existing relationships with the child, birth parent, or extended family. In kin, I think you heard me mention that in the video, they don't know each other. There's been no pre-existing relationship. I'm even going to take this one step further. When you have a foster parent who raised the foster child, and then that foster child has a child, and now the foster parent is raising that previous foster parent's child, could somebody chat for me? Is that kinship or not? Foster parent raised a foster child. Now the foster parent is raising the child of the previous foster parent. Is that kin?
We're getting a resounding yes.
Okay, a resounding yes. Oh, you folks got it. That's great. Okay. We couldn't think that way 30, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And you just did it so automatically. That is so impressive. Yeah, pre-existing is the key, because that foster parent now has to change its priorities, its loyalties to that baby that's now in their care. And they had a pre-existing relationship. So all those issues that we talked about of how could you, how you knew me first, how could you treat them, make them special over me, all those pre-existing relationships and attachments, it gets played out, okay? But it's the pre-existing, and I just wanted to give you a non-biological analogy, and you got it so well. But that's the key to me in terms of what's so existing. It's changing those pre-existing relationships, because it's number two, that's the work for relative caregivers and kinship families. Redefining the pre-existing relationships, roles, hierarchy, status, loyalties, priorities, attachments. It's changing that, because here's the key. Families members may feel that they have the same rights, the same privileges, the same entitlements that they had before the child was placed into care. That's why, and that's the vulnerability that relative caregivers have. They're vulnerable to, you knew me first. How could you put the child's needs over me? I'm your child. I lived here first. How can you now ask me not to live here? That's the vulnerability caregivers have, which foster parents and adoptive parents are not vulnerable to. No one's going to say to them, how come you knew me first? And that's the Achilles heel, because that can result in now having to set limits, now having to say no, now having to get restraining orders. Can you see that what comes out of those kind of switches and those changes? You know, I'm kind of talking the extreme, but it's relative caregivers having to deal with that Achilles heel and that vulnerability that makes it very difficult. For non-kin, and by non-kin, I'm talking about foster parents, adoptive parents that are not related, they're creating a new family. There's no previous history to redefine. And in fact, they're looking forward to the changes in many cases. Kin, loss, and grief issues as a family member or friend of the child. For kin, they're celebrating becoming a new family and the child as a new family member. So for the relative caregiver, it's loss, it's grief for the family members, and that's totally separate from the child. That's what's so interesting. That's what's so different in kinship care. This has nothing to do with the child that these relative caregivers are feeling. You got to remember, in kinship care, relatives knew the birth parent before they knew the child. So they're going to be the regrets. They're going to be the feelings. They're going to be the loss. So I feel like I'm turning you into therapists, those that are watching this as providers. But yeah, you may have to be prepared to have them go through a loss and grief process so that they can be there for the child. That's how the two come in hand. Okay, that child's loss and grief can trigger it. Now I sound like trauma therapist, don't I? But yeah, that child's loss and grief can trigger their loss and grief that they're having for that birth parent. But in that training that I did in terms of the strengths of kinship care, that loss and grief, though, that family member has is also the bond that they have with the child, because they can say to the child, Yes, I know you have loss and you're feeling bad, but you have to remember I have loss and grief just like you, and this is how I'm going to handle it. Because you got to remember, I knew your mother and father as my brother and sister before you knew them as your parent. That's the bond. That's the work. That's the strength. Number 4, mixed feelings about loss of a role as a grandparent. Remember that example that I gave you about the child who was running away? Double loss. Loss of the relationship for the child, loss of the relationship for their grandparent. So they were both feeling the loss, but then this is where the aunts and the uncles come into play. This is where the family comes into play. This is what Anna was talking about, how that you then have to help heal each other by recognizing it, talking about the loss. That child needs to understand grandmom has to be your parent right now. The grandchildren have to understand grandmom has to be the parent to your brother and sister. You know, grandparent has to be the parent to your niece or your cousin. And understanding the feelings, being able to verbalize that, and to talk about the role of family and having to make that adjustment. Why? To keep the child in the family. That's what bonds. That's what helps people be resilient. That's what helps people come together, and letting those other family members realize that, and this is what we'll do for you if this should ever happen to you. But it's his turn now. And non-kin, excitement about the new roles as parents. They're not feeling any loss. Remember, they weren't previous. They were not. They didn't have a previous role to lose. That's the difference. No previous roles to lose. When that foster parent starts out as a foster parent, they start out clearly as a foster parent. Decision to become a caregiver is unplanned, in a crisis, requests from parents, child protective services, and look at how non-kin come into becoming a caregiver. It's planned. It's pursued. They go through training. They go through preparation. For relative caregivers, it could be 24 to 72 hours, and the next thing you know, here comes the child. It's unplanned, it's in a crisis, which again is a strength. You know, let's put it this way, you can't go to a foster parent or potential foster parent's door or a potential prospective adoptive parent's door and knock on the door and say, listen, I have this child that needs a foster home. I take that back. Foster parents do have horror stories, you know, but you've already decided to be a permanency option. You're prepared for that. That relative caregiver is not, okay? But it's the whole idea of that for a foster parent, it's pursued, it's planned, even being in a crisis, it's planned, it's something that they choose to do. Well, and consequently, there's limited preparation for the caregiver prior to the child's placement in the home. Preparation for caregiving role and support already in place before the child is placed. Even if it's an emergency placement for that foster parent, there's been that 3 months, 6 months of training to prepare you for the crisis placement. There's been that training for the adoptive family around the special needs of the children before the placement. For relative caregivers, it's on the job. It's after the placement where a lot of the preparation comes into play. The requirements on the job. What I'm talking about, clearances, the trainings. It's after the child is coming to the home. So it's unanticipated. The requirements have to occur while the child is there. For relative caregivers, you have to meet the requirements before the children are placed with you. Big difference. And in meeting those requirements and having a chance to meet the requirements, you do it before the child is placed. And with the relative caregivers, again, it's after the fact. And that can cause that ambivalence that you sometimes see. Feeling guilty or responsible for the birth parent's problems. Non-kin, they don't feel guilty. They may feel empathy, but they don't feel guilty. They don't feel responsible for the birth parent's problems. For the service providers, go back to your courses on bonding and attachment. And here's my question to you. A relative caregiver's initial and bonding and attachment, I'll change this around. A foster parent's and adoptive parents' initial experience of bonding and attachment is with whom first? Can somebody chat that? Answer to me. A foster parent or adoptive parent's initial experiences of bonding and attachment is with whom first? The birth parent of the child or the child?
We're getting resounding the child.
The child, exactly. For a relative caregiver, for a kinship care provider, the initial attachment and bonding is with whom first? The child's birth parent.
Now we're getting birth parent.
Resounding, exactly.
Resounding.
Exactly. Now, when that foster parent has to place the needs of the children over that of the birth parent, or that adoptive parent has to place the needs of the children over the birth parent, do you feel as though they are going to feel any guilt? Chat, your answer.
A bit of a mix. No and yes.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay. I would have expected a resounding no,
Hmm.
because the initial attachment is with the child. You may feel guilty, but not as a relative, not as a member of that, not as a relative of the birth parent. You may feel some guilt, okay, but you're not going to feel responsible for why the child has to go into your care. Let me ask the question another way. For the birth parent who now has to place the need, for the kinship caregiver who now has to place the need of the children over that of the birth parents, do you think they might feel guilty?
Resounding yes.
Yes, okay. I guess that's the point. It's the resounding yes. So for me, and if you notice, I started off with, go back to your course on attachment 101. And for the caregivers in the audience, I know they live this. I know they see this. And that can be the source of the guilt. And then even if you're not the birth parent, even if you're not the parent of the caregiver, as a family member, you can still feel the guilt. I'll hear things like, I should have known. Why didn't I see this coming? We as a family should have stepped in. So again, that whole issue of attachment has so much to do with the feelings of guilt and responsibility. Ambivalence, guilty. I'm even going to put the word resentful for having to assume parental responsibilities. This is embarrassing, but I'm going to have to go back to 30 or 40 years ago. Best practice then was to pathologize caregivers and stigmatize caregivers who felt ambivalent or who felt resentful. You should want to do this because this is family. You should want to do this. There should be no question in your mind. You should just step up to the plate and immediately want to do this. If you are ambivalent and if you are resentful, there's something wrong with you. This is the way we're approaching relative caregivers. And these were our attitudes as professionals, if they were ambivalent or if they were feeling resentful. What we've come to realize is, let me take you back a little bit earlier, when you are unprepared, when it's unplanned, in a crisis, without services, you can't help but feel ambivalent. So what I've seen professionals today do, and kudos to you, is being able to look at ambivalence and normalize it, give relative caregivers a chance to verbalize it, and not use blackmail. I know that's a terrible thing to say, because we used to blackmail. If you don't take the children, if you act resentful, if you're ambivalent, we will take the children from you. So caregivers did not express it, and they became walking time bombs. So that's why that's why I said kudos to you, because it has a lot to do with your services and your engagement that you provide relative caregivers and how you respond to the ambivalence. CPS workers, you have to walk in there expecting ambivalence right from the very beginning. I know you're going to be taking this child, thank you very much, but if you are feeling ambivalent, I understand. It's normal. It was in a crisis, it was planned, and all I want you to do is to commit to going through a process to decide whether or not you want this child. Going through a process, commit to the process, not to committing to becoming a permanency option, but committing to the process to decide whether or not you can become an option, whether or not it's in your best interest and the child's interest to live together, to be together. And we're going to use the next 2 to 3 weeks, the next 2 to 3 months to see if this is real for you. And the process is going to start with, what are the things you need to know whether or not you can or can't do? Are you going to need clothes? Are you going to need bedding? Are you going to need, what are those things that are going to help you figure out whether or not you can or can't do that? That's the response to the ambivalence. Another part of that ambivalence and resentfulness that you have to respond to is by giving relative caregivers permission to, I'll be very specific, let me know if you're having second thoughts. You got to be able to say that to your relative caregivers. Let me know if you're having second thoughts. Let me know if you're thinking about changing your mind. That's prevention planning, folks. It prevents the relative caregivers to have to get to the point of blowing up or becoming time bombs and then giving you that call over the phone, come and get them. It prevents the crisis. So but it starts with recognizing the ambivalence, recognizing the resentment, normalizing it, taking away the pathology, giving them a way to express those feelings, and giving them a way to verbalize, I'm having second thoughts, so we can talk about how we can handle this, because I don't want you to have to go into a crisis if you're feeling as though you can't take care of this child, because this just creates more trauma for the child. Boy, this feels like a whole nother training, doesn't it, Melissa? You know, but folks, are y'all with me on this? Anna?
Yes, and we're getting really powerful comments in the chat, including from one woman who was made to take a drug test because her sister was a user, so therefore she must be.
Wow.
Another one who, is said, why do you need any help? Why aren't you willing to take care of family? Why do you need money and food, health?
That's classic, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and if they're being asked that, you need to know it's because that was from 30 and 40 years ago. They're looking at you as if you were a foster parent or an adopted parent, and they're still working out of that bias and out of that standard. Okay. So that's the change that we have to look at in terms of how we provide services to kinship caregivers. That's the implication. How do we handle our bias around ambivalence, around resentment that the relative caregivers are feeling, and then how we need to normalize it so that relative caregivers can first go through a process of figuring out, see, for relative caregivers, they're doing it before they know they want to do it. Foster parents and adoptive parents are doing it already knowing they want to do it. That's a stage you have to take relative caregivers through. Number 10, feeling they are betraying or competing with birth parents by assuming a legal or formal relationship with the child. You know where this comes from. This came from a judge, and he had asked in a training that I did, when a foster and adoptive parents go through the courts and I'm finalizing adoptions, they're bringing in cakes, they bring in balloons, they're taking pictures, but those relative caregivers, they don't look happy. What's wrong with them? And you've got to understand, see, I'm looking at people smiling and laughing because you get it. Yeah, that finalization represents, for some people, I failed. For some people that finalization represents, it's a reflection on them. For some people, I'm still seeing the smiles because folks are getting it. For some people, it's a reflection of, I've lost hope. For some people, it's the fear of, oh my goodness, the parents are going to be so angry at me because they're going to feel as though I gave up on them, that I betrayed them, that I'm saying that they're failures and that they can't do the job and that I'm competing with them. So that's where that comes from. That judge is saying to me, why aren't they happy? Why aren't they feeling good? But yeah, for relative caregivers, it can feel like betrayal. It can feel like competing. It can feel like they're a failure. So for a lot of relative caregivers, assuming legal and formal relationships is not something to look forward to. For non-kin, you want that legal relationship as soon as possible. I remember working in adoption, and the workers were going crazy with, he's calling me about finalization again. When are you going to terminate those rights? When's my court date? Okay. Caregivers, I don't know if you get that. When's my court date? When are you gonna finalize? Might be a little bit difference.
Well, we get the when's my court date. I'm tired of having you tell me to miss work once a month, twice a month to see and meet with you and see and meet with a financial person and see and meet with the CASA. And I mean, I have a meeting tomorrow with my adoption worker for my granddaughter who's 3.5. She'll be 4 in November. This is my
Mm,
8th worker.
wow.
And I still I have no bonding with this woman. So I wouldn't tell her if I had conflicting emotions. I wouldn't trust her to tell her we had ants or one of my chickens got killed by a raccoon this
I
weekend.
understand.
I'm not mentioning that. She
No.
might take my baby.
Oh, see, that's the example of the blackmail, folks, that we used to do. I'm sorry that's still happening now. Okay, but that's the implications. That's why this training is so important, because we need to become current and we need to update our approaches with relative caregivers. You know, because again, that's a foster parent mentality. You should want to do it. You shouldn't have any complaints. There shouldn't be any reasons to make you postpone, not want to do it. Yeah, that you do have reasons, and you're right, that worker needs to make you feel safe to ask those questions, to express those feelings, and to admit the ambivalence. So I see, Anna, this makes me want to come out of retirement when I hear stuff like this. And Melissa, but I'm
There's
supposed to
still,
be. We see,
yeah, there's still a lot to do. We
yeah,
have
there's
a,
still not to do. Yes.
yes, we have another question, Dr. Crumbley, that talks
Mhm.
about that, quote unquote, late arriving relative, who may come to the attention of the child welfare agency
Mm,
later. And they
yes,
may be late arriving because notice wasn't sent and they didn't know. That's one reason that often
right.
happens. But the other reason is because of ambivalence about that
That's right.
caregiving. So can you talk about how we can help professionals understand why a relative might not step up right away?
Well, you know what? I think the family finders, folks in child welfare, my advice to you is to expect relative caregivers when you're approaching them about becoming a permanency option, expect them to say no. When we did this and they said no, we pathologized it. Okay, that's it. We're never going to come back. Please expect them to say a no initially because of the ambivalence, because of the loyalty. For a lot of relative caregivers, they want to consider themselves as the last option, not the first option. The last option when all else fails. So the implications of that is they're going to say no. You stay connected with that relative caregiver right through the entire process so that they can constantly review and revisit their involvement with the child around permanency issues. So you have to let relative caregivers know, and you might even want to normalize that right upset. I know you're going to say no, and I expect that. But right now, we just want to keep you involved so that you can revisit how you might want to change your relationship, whether or not you want to formalize that relationship. It comes under the term of concurrent planning, folks. Take that approach with your relative caregivers. Expect them to say no, but it can be out of loyalty. I don't want the birth parent to think I'm betraying them or competing with them. I don't want the birth parent to feel as though I'm being disloyal to them and giving up on them by stepping up and saying, yeah, I'll take the child. And at the same time, the relative caregivers may be feeling as though I don't want to have to live with that loss unless I have to, because there is loss. Lifestyle, money, finances, that's going to be a last resort if they have to. I hope that answers your question, Anna, in terms of.
It answered, yes, I believe it does.
Okay. Relative caregivers may feel in competition with the birth parents if the child becomes more attached to caregivers and birth parents. And in non-kin, they want that child to call them mom as soon as possible. They want that child to start attaching to them as adoptive parents. Please call me mom. Please tell me you love me as soon as possible. For a relative caregiver, they don't, or I'll tell you a story. We would go up to Muncie prison, which was a women's prison. Before every relative caregiver or kin got off the bus, they would have a little family meeting with the children and they would say, okay, we're getting ready to visit your mom. your mother who's in prison, please don't call me. Anybody want to fill in that word? In front of your mother. Please don't call me. Anybody want to chat?
Mom.
Thank you. Please
Oh,
don't.
overwhelming.
Yes, overwhelming. Okay. Yeah, sounds like these folks have been there, done this. Okay. Yeah. May feel in competition with the birth parents if the child becomes more attached. And that word is mom. That's the ultimate word that can trigger the competition, can trigger the loss for the birth parents. What was so beautiful, though, in terms of how that loss became a strength, was when we got with the birth parents in the prisons, and we would have to talk to them about using their power, using their influence by giving the children permission to call grandma mom. And that was so powerful. So again, I guess I'm getting more into the strengths, okay, and how you can take a loss and make it become a strength, because that's the work in kinship care, that relative caregiver being able to accept that role. Because the downside is relative caregivers would say, don't call me mom, but I bet you every relative caregiver out there realizes you may say, don't call me mom, but do you need to attach to the child as a mom? Yes or no?
Dr. Crumbley, we have a good point here, which is how is your advice different if the parent is not in the picture at all? They have abandoned the child to the kinship care.
Oh, yeah. You know what I've seen relative caregivers do that is so powerful is sometimes they'll talk to the children in the third person. Well, you know what? If your mom was here, she would be so proud of you. If dad was here, he would be so proud of you. You know how you could make your mom and dad proud of you if you were here? Go to school. I know you miss them. Let's talk about what are we going to do to remember them. So it's those kinds of discussions around loss and grief related to the absent birth parent that you can have with the children. I know you feel lost because they're not there. So let's talk about how to deal with it in a way that doesn't hurt you, that doesn't hurt the people around you, that doesn't damage the people around you or yourself, so that you can still express it. So it's those kinds of conversations around loss, because you can't take it away. But how do you handle it? How do you manage it? You having conversations about what mom and dad would feel, so that children can think positively about loss and grief and can still act on what they would do. So those would be some of my suggestions for dealing with when mom and dad aren't there and how to deal with that loss and grief.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay. Number 13. Split loyalties and hesitations to legalize or prioritize the child's needs over that of the birth parents. Just go back to all our discussions on initial attachments, because that'll explain why they may not want to put the needs of the children over the birth parent. Go back to the feelings around hesitation related to who your initial attachment is to. Go back to our conversations earlier around not wanting the birth parent to feel as though you've given up on them, that you think they're a failure. So, because when you finalize, it says a whole lot, your loyalty to the children, how you feel about the birth parents, and the birth parents will say things like, you don't want me to be successful. You want to take my child from me, so there can be, and trying to avoid that anger can sometimes make relative caregivers hesitant, because they have to deal with that birth parents loss and grief and anger. So a lot of times your work is going to be, how do you help the caregiver live with the grief, live with the loss, live with the attacks, because they're going to get it. How do you handle it? How do you survive it? The support groups are so crucial in kinship care, in terms of caregivers healing caregivers. And the last one, may feel embarrassed by the reasons to become a caregiver. Embarrassment can disrupt placements. Embarrassment can stop permanency planning. Embarrassment can stop relative caregivers from following through on services. And we didn't know that 30, 40 years ago. We were writing it up as, I mean, this is embarrassing. I'd be writing it up as oppositional defiant. You know what I mean? ODD. You know what I mean? That's why these caregivers aren't following through with service plans. No, you have to remember, when caregivers are sharing stories and explanations for why the children are in their care, they're also sharing stories about who else. Anybody want to chat? When they're talking about the birth parents, they're also talking about who else?
The children.
And who else?
Themselves.
Themselves. Foster parents are not talking about themselves or their relative. Relative caregivers are. It's personal, and that can be embarrassing. Make it personal. I'll give you a personal example. When your brothers and sisters are doing well, that's a reflection on who? You, your family, okay? Foster parent, adopted parent, it's not a reflection on them. Even the children's behavior isn't a reflection on him. Well, you know, I adopted that child. You know, that's why he's acting that way. I'm being smart, okay? But there's always that out. There's always that, and I don't mean to look at it out, but it's a defense. For relative caregivers, you don't have that defense, and they can feel embarrassed. That can stop them from going to intakes. That can stop them from pursuing services where they have to go for charitable foods or charitable or services for furniture. It can stop them from following up on doctor's appointments because they don't want to have to deal with the embarrassment of talking about why this child is in care with me. So I just want you to kind of be aware of the embarrassment. Your work here is being able to ask relative caregivers, is this experiencing going to be embarrassing for you? Think about foster parents and adoptive parents. I mean, if they're good, the good ones, they've got the laptop, they've got the files, they're walking into the social service agencies. Hey, Bob, hey, Sarah, how you doing? You need an assessment? Look, just give me the paperwork. You know I can fill this out. They're used to the system, they know the folks, they're friendly. But for caregivers, it's embarrassing. They're coming in there as an outsider. And again, it's a reflection on them. And then having to explain to the children why they're not with their parents. That can be very different. And again, these are things that can stop the placement, disrupt the placement, and make it difficult for relative caregivers. So a lot of the work is, how do you handle the embarrassment? What are going to be those embarrassing moments? Coming up with the plan to deal with the embarrassment, how to talk about disclosure, what the story is going to be for the explanations. That's the work there for us around dealing with that feeling of embarrassment. Because guess who else that carries over to? The children. We have to do the work with them. How do they explain to their friends? How do they explain to their family? How do they explain to their school associates? Yeah. Okay. Oh, all right. I guess I guess I need to wind down. Oh, I wanted to show one more thing. Anna, what am I going to do? Oh, okay. Oh, wait a minute. I had another one.
Yeah, you just had one slide left.
All right, one slide left. But you know what? It ties into the chart that I have. Okay.
Yes.
Let's see. Now, what do I need to do? Oh, Anna, tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Close out, right? Close out.
No, you're good. We can see it. I wouldn't worry about it. I think we can see it just fine like that.
Okay, all right. But instead of doing 15, Anna, I wanted to go to that chart that I have at the very end, because I could do two at one time.
Yeah.
Now, how? So do I just close out of here as an X? No. Stop the sharing. No.
Yep.
Stop sharing.
You could just scroll up for when it was on your slide deck. Was it on your slide deck early?
No.
Nope.
It's a separate document.
Dr. Crumbley, I can end your screen sharing and then you can share your chart.
Okay, Ali.
There you go.
Oh, thank you. Go to share. And
while you're doing
is
that,
my
Dr.
chart.
Crumbley.
Here we go.
Okay.
There you go. Okay. And this is a good way to end. It's important that you need to know that you are also part of the family's dynamics. And that's why I put that chart up there. Okay, and I'm going to leave you, I'm going to ask you this one question. And you don't have to try to answer it, but it's the question that I think is important at the end of this training. How do I impact family dynamics? How do I impact authority in the family, decision-making in the family? You have dyad relationships with everyone in that family. The birth parent, the children, the aunts, the uncles, anybody that's affected by your policies, such as background checks, anyone affected by your policies of visitations, of supervisions, anyone who's affected by your supervision of the children, you are affecting members of the family, especially if there's a file that says this mother has been known before, or the caregiver has been known to the agency before. You have a relationship, those dyads. You're affecting loyalty in the family in terms of the caregiver having to place the needs of the children over the birth parents. A lot of times it's the court orders, it's the visitation orders, it's the contact orders, it's the restraining orders. All those orders impact loyalty, stability, status, trust. Let me also mention this as well. You need to use your leverage as an agency, as an organization, as a worker on the macro, micro level. You need to be able to use your authority. I'll be more specific. Caregivers are constantly the messengers. And you know what happens to caregivers. Caregivers, the messenger gets killed. Agencies and organizations need to be thinking about doing their own messaging. They need to be thinking about using their ability to say the buck stops with me. They need to be able to say that it's my decision, this is what we want, and getting the caregiver out of the middle. Strategize with the caregivers how you're going to use your leverage. Sometimes you have to say to the caregiver, tell them it's me, it's my fault. Sometimes you're going to have to say to the birth parent, please tell your children, we're the bad guys. We're asking that they go through the drug tests. You know, it's not grandma. Grandma doesn't want you here because she's trying to break up your family. We're the agency, and we're saying these are the things mom and dad have to do in order for you to be returned to them. Agencies need to step up, do that, get those caregivers out of the middle. That's why I'm talking about leveraging your power, stopping the buck there, and not allowing caregivers to have to be killed because they're the messenger. Look at your dyad relationships throughout the whole system so that you know how you're impacting family dynamics, and then step into the family to be able to define your roles, your relationships, and deal with some of the loss and the hurt that they're feeling because of your system. And I'm talking about courts, child welfare, the school system, mental health. Yeah, please look at that perspective. How do you use your leverage? How do you strategize with the caregivers? How do you keep the caregivers out of the way? And what dyad work do you need to do with the members in that family? So let me leave. And here's the last thing, which ties into the last point, which was number 15. Please know, I'll ask it as a question. As a relative, as a relative, caregiver, and as a member of the family, what makes you feel as though you have the right to raise a member of your family? Should be one word: blood. That's what makes you feel as though you have a right to raise that child or another member of the family. For foster parents and adopted parents, what makes them feel like they have the right is the legal permission of courts. Therefore, for relative caregivers and for kin, they don't feel as though they need your permission because they feel as though it's their right. Consequently, they don't feel as though they have to jump through your hoops and prove anything to you. And if anything, they may feel as though they're doing you a favor. For foster parents, they have to jump through the hoops. Not that they want to, but they know they need your permission to give them the rights to raise that child. So I say that because for relative caregivers, your involvement as a system may be looked at as intrusion, not as something that they want. That's why many of your informal families don't want you involved, or why the formal families want to get you out. You look like intrusion because they don't feel as though they need your approval. Foster parents, adopted parents, they know they need it, therefore they invite it and they accept it. All that to say, expect relative caregivers to be resistant initially, to look at you as an intrusion, and to not be willing to accept your services. You will have to go through rites of passage, which is a conversation saying, you may not want me here. I can understand that. These are the services I have to offer so that I can get out of your life as soon as possible. Now, please tell me what you need. That's a very different
Thank
kind of
you.
approach.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crumbley.
Well, I'm
Um,
sorry, Anna. I know I was running over.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Just thank you so much for your time and for sharing all this great information. You have a lot of love in the chat.
It's mutual.
And you'll see in the chat as well, resources of Dr. Crumbley's, resources on